Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the late start. I was just sharing with Amy and Kate that these days you have 15 separate logins and two-factor authentications and different things. So it took me a while to work my way through those. I apologize for being a little bit late. We will kickstart things very soon. We'll be joined by my colleague Yvette Gassick as well. She's having some issues with finding the correct link. So that might just take a moment or two. But in the meantime, I'd like to introduce you to Amy and Kate from Goulburn Valley Health, who have very kindly offered to join us and share their experiences with the organisation in running a global mobility program. Uh, Thanks for joining, Yvette. I was just in the process of introducing Amy and Kate. So, by way of introduction, Amy Dainton is a seasoned professional with an impressive 17-year career at Goulburn Valley Health. Her unwavering commitment and expertise in medical workforce management has made her an invaluable asset to the organisation. Amy's journey began in the healthcare industry, where she quickly rose through the ranks, demonstrating leadership and organisational skills. Her role as HMO coordinator is takes a lead role in the recruitment, engagement, and operational management of approximately 200 plus junior medical staff. Wow, Amy, that's pretty impressive. The HMO coordinator is responsible for ensuring that the efficient and effective and processes are in place to manage junior medical workforce, working in close partnership with other members of the medical workforce team to manage the full employee life cycle. HMO coordinator is the subject matter expert around medical workforce management, including APRA and visa processes applicable to senior and junior medical workforce at Goulburn Valley Health. Amy's legacy is one of professionalism, compassion, and expertise. Her tireless efforts in healthcare management and knowledge in immigration have touched the lives of many, making her a true leader in the field. With an impressive career spanning nearly 2 decades, Amy continues to make a meaningful impact on both GV Health and the lives of the medical staff she assists in their vocational and pre-vocational journeys. So welcome, Amy. And excuse me if I was smirking during that. I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing because I knew just how embarrassed you would be about all of those things being said about you. So my apologies if I gave the wrong impression. Kate, thank you for joining us. Kate Smith has worked at Goulburn Valley Health for 6.5 years in the Employment Services team, for 4.5 years being the Employment Services Advisor for the last year. So very much at the coalface, Kate. The Employment Services Advisor provides expert consultancy services and support to senior managers and staff on all aspects of the employment services function, and also provides guidance and support to the employment services team. With regards to international recruitment, Kate also works closely with the talent acquisition team, nursing and allied health managers, and the manager nursing midwifery workforce. This work includes reviewing applications to ensure candidates meet GV Health's requirements and that the recruitment process has been adhered to, then collating documents required for visas, nominations and submitting applications. The Employment Services Advisor contributes to the overall provision of quality and best practice HR and employment services across GV Health in conjunction with the Manager of Employment Services, the lovely Sheridan Fitch. The role ensures the provision of efficient and effective employment services are provided to the organisation. The Employment Services Advisor assists the manager with the implementation of operational priorities and ongoing education to senior managers on employment services, service-related functions. Now, thank you very much for both of you for joining us. And I think just for everyone's benefit in the audience, the reason that we've asked Amy and Kate to come along is because GVH has had a very long-running global mobility focus. I use the language global mobility. That's the term that's used more broadly in the sector. And it relates to, all of those activities that go to finding the right people overseas and bringing them to your business. And I think, Amy, you once mentioned up to 85% of your medical workforce are IMGs. And, that's quite an incredible number. And I think that you guys can really benefit everyone by sharing your experience and expertise in this sector. By way of introduction, we're also joined by Yvette. Yvette's a qualified lawyer with a passion for immigration. She has close to 20 years of experience in global and boutique immigration firms. Yvette's developed a deep understanding of the intricacies of immigration law and management. Her unique perspective comes from having worked on both sides of the fence, including in a practice representing the Minister of Immigration. For those who aren't aware, that's during court appeals and so forth. This breadth of experience allows her to provide comprehensive and well-rounded support to clients. Yvette's approach is centered on providing clear and concise advice to clients, ensuring the complexities of immigration law are simplified and easily understood. She has extensive experience in working on establishing and managing immigration programs for domestic and global countries across a variety of industries, and she joined our firm, Rome, earlier this year in May as our practice leader, leading the legal team both locally and internationally. So thank you very much for joining us, Yvette.
Thanks, Jackson.
Now, for those who haven't met me before, my name's Jackson Taylor. I'm the managing partner at Rome Migration Law. In this capacity, I guess, oversee the sort of direction of the firm. One of the things that's been happening in our organisation over the last 2 to 3 years is a really increased focus in this medical and nursing allied health space. We've been working with GBH in a variety of capacities since around 2016, 2017. But since the pandemic and through the course of the pandemic, the needs in this area have really changed dramatically. And I think you're all very conscious of that with the shortages in nursing and now I think shortages in both junior as well as the senior medical workforce having a really major impact. So just for everyone's benefit, everyone on the call today is from a public healthcare background and is currently employed at a public healthcare organisation. So thank you very much to you all for joining us. What I'll do now is just share my screen so that we can run through some of these slides. So please just bear with me a moment. Okay, so share screen. Okay, so just confirming, can everyone see that?
Yes, I can.
You can, wonderful. What about the panelists attending? Can anyone see that?
Yes.
Thank you very much, folks. All right, wonderful. So the focus today will be around optimizing that workforce mobility program. It's not an easy thing to do. There are many different moving parts, and we'll talk about that as we go. We'll have a presentation for about 45, 50 minutes initially, and then we'll move to some questions from the audience. It may not take the full hour and a half. We may be closer to an hour and 15, but we're happy to stick around and talk through all the various issues. We've already gone through introductions, so hopefully everyone is familiar with the team today. On to the agenda. So I'll speak briefly about the current state of healthcare shortages in Australia. I'm sure it's something that you are all acutely aware of. I think one of the benefits that we can bring as service providers is that we are both seeing both sides of things. We're seeing things from a candidate side, we're seeing things from an employer side. We're also working with organisations in the private sector. So we have private sector clients in both the private hospital sector and the more GP clinic, particularly in rural and regional Australia. Some of our rural employers are in places that are, 6 to 8 hours drive from a capital city, and they are, facing really significant challenges in that context. We also talk to just a whole variety of different people that you guys may not come across, given your focus and your particular workplaces. So that can be of benefit at times. Yvette will talk to us about how to go about structuring a global mobility program. And I know, Yvette, you've worked in past lives with some very big companies, some of the sort of Fortune 500, some of the largest users of the visa program in Australia. So I'm sure you'll be able to share some valuable expertise there. And then Amy and Kate will share their experience with GVH on managing the programs. And then we'll touch base briefly on immigration compliance and the government's increased focus at the moment on making sure those things work. And then we'll close off with questions for everyone. If there are questions as we go through, please feel free to drop a question into the chat. I think there is also a Q&A function. It's unlikely we'll be using the Q&A function, but it is open there, so feel free to enter any questions as we go along. So, current state of healthcare workforce in Australia. I think as a firm, we focus more particularly on doctors and nurses, although we do assist with allied health in a variety of different contexts. With nurses, there is an increasing demand, okay? And I mean, I think everyone knows that. But one of the things that we are really seeing occur is a change in the power balance between employers and employees post-COVID. International nurses are very conscious that they are in great demand, not just in Australia, but globally. So Australia is competing not just metro and rural or metro and regional, not just between states, but competing with New Zealand, Canada, USA, Ireland, UK, as well as some of the non-speaking European countries. That means that the demands that are being made by candidates are increasing from our perspective. We're seeing a lot of nurses who are essentially saying, I'm not going to move unless you offer me permanent residency off the bat. Okay. And that's very problematic in Australia because the way that our permanent employer-sponsored visa is structured, in particular the 186, basically means that the person can show up at the airport and give you a call and say, I'm not coming. And you don't really have much recourse to reclaim any money that's been spent. It's a problem. So that's something to be quite conscious of. And I think the other thing is that we know that the pipeline for registered nurses isn't likely to get much better in the coming years. Average age of a registered nurse in Australia at this point is 45. That's quite an older workforce in that sense. And despite efforts such as the Victorian government offering, sort of rebates or reduced courses of study to become an RN, my feedback or the feedback that I've heard is that essentially those programs still aren't full. Okay, so despite that offer from the Victorian state government, doesn't mean that the universities are overflowing with nursing students. Demographic changes also mean that there will be fewer people coming into the workforce over the next 10 years because there are just fewer people in that age bracket between, 10 and 20 who are going to come into the workforce in the next 10 years. It's a smaller population demographic cohort than previous. And that means that more pressure will be placed. I think as a result, what we're seeing is increased interest in jurisdictions that employers wouldn't previously have looked at. We've seen a significant increase in interest in South Africa, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, which historically haven't been major sources of talent. I think there is interest in the Philippines, but there are significant limitations for anyone who's been through the Filipino government POLO or POEA process. There is an additional hurdle there that is very challenging. And there are also potentially modern slavery concerns around the way that recruiters in the Philippines in particular operate. So the existing nursing shortage is likely to continue to become worse. And I think employers really need to revisit how they're doing this. Obviously, many of you will be subject to the, incentives and the different schemes that are imposed by state governments. But I think that international recruitment in this sector is only going to become more significant over the next decade or so. And I know the government's working on a couple of reviews of APRA to try and facilitate this process. We had this scenario where the um, bridging courses, the iron courses that international nurses were completing were removed just prior to COVID. And at the moment, many of those people who don't qualify for sort of immediate registration on the basis that they are from, one of the recognized nursing jurisdictions like Ireland and the US and Canada and so forth, they need to complete that exam in Adelaide. The APRA report recommends changes to that. I think it's really critical that they come through, and hopefully the government is looking at this in a big picture and addressing it, but it's going to be a key challenge. In terms of doctors, I think, again, Amy and I were speaking about this just the other day. The challenges continue. The number of junior doctors isn't going to meet the requirements. And we all know that senior doctors are very challenging to recruit and maintain, given the potential disparity of income between, private and public sector. So things are not looking great. I'm not trying to depress anyone specifically, but it's a challenging space, and I don't think it's going to get any easier over the next couple of years. So something that everyone really needs to be aware of and focused on how to address. And that's why we've come together today. Yvette, I might throw over to you now to talk a bit about how organisations can best go about developing and structuring a mobility program. Please.
Yep, sure. Thank you. So, as Jackson has said, and it's very clear to all of you who are in the healthcare space, there's going to be an increasing need for international recruitment, and having a solid, structured mobility program for your international recruitment and a workforce strategy in place is going to be critical. And it's critical because if you're going to be successful and have a successful international mobility program, the structure around it is going to be key to its success. So what is a structured mobility program and what does it look like? It really does, and the reason I've got this diagram up here is to really show you the depth required to structure an international recruitment program and have a solid onboarding policy in place. So there are a number of arms across all of your, in your healthcare spaces. And when you're looking at medical recruitment, obviously you have established teams that are involved in that process. As this example illustrates, there are at least 6 different stakeholders involved in being able to successfully implement such a program. So to give you a taste, there's the recruitment team in this example. There's a nurses and midwife working unit, international recruitment coordinator and administration. There's the hiring manager. Then they have a pool that looks after the medical workforce unit. They'll have a candidate manager. And then they also have, obviously, us being your immigration lawyers in there. Now, as you can see, we come in quite late in the piece. There's a lot of pre-work that happens that we're not privy to necessarily to get to the point where we're triggered to actually assist you. So you can see there, if you can see it, it's not very clear, I apologise, but it very clearly sets out that the start of the process is where the applicant applies through your portal, whether it's more likely to be online, I imagine, in these days, through your centralised international recruitment portal. And then obviously you then through your team, and that's through the coordinator often for international recruitment, assess the candidate's suitability and look at what specifically is appropriate. So do they meet requirements of what your requirements are? So the question then becomes, have you established those processes? So it's really important that not only are we talking about looking at the workflow, but under each of those workflows is that you've got defined processes and systems in place to successfully execute each of those steps. So the best practices And this is why we have global Goulburn Valley Health here as our, if you like, best in class example that are going to talk us through a case study, or really talk through some questions around how they are successful at, and how they became successful at what they do. But looking more broadly here, again, back at this diagram, I think often what we find as immigration lawyers is where things can fall down is where these pre-steps have not been solidly established, or if often the left arm is not communicating with the right arm, because there are so many units involved that if that communication piece is not strong, then of course it really impacts the flow. And this is where you risk the candidates and losing the candidates. And it's not always because of this, where, it's, for example, the processes, but more often than not, you'll lose their engagement and their commitment if they don't see that there is a solid process in place and it's not clear to them what next steps are. We'll also talk today about, the way it's very much a candidate driven market, and more so around this whole question around permanent residence as well. It's become a very hot topic, and a tool that a lot of candidates are using to negotiate and be able to get better outcomes for themselves, because it is very much a a candidate's market, given the shortages that everyone is experiencing here. If we move to the next slide. So before I do that, sorry, does anyone have any comments or questions around, having an established process in place in terms of your mobility program? Do you actually have established a workflow like this? And if you haven't, obviously the recommendation is that you do. And going into the detail here is really going to be critical and key to you being able to do that. So not only are we talking about, the recruitment arm here and the coordinators, we're also talking about, your hiring manager, who is quite critical in this process, together with the team in the medical workforce unit that assess the pool and look at their suitability under your programs. So it's really important everyone has in each of these spaces. Do you have, for example, a very clear outline on the role and responsibilities of your coordinator who is looking after your medical workforce? Is that clearly set out what they're expected to do? Similarly, is your hiring manager clear on what their role and responsibilities are? So to give you an example, I've had a look at some other healthcare providers, and what they sort of set out of the responsibilities for a hiring manager are things like they're available to attend scheduled interviews. They create processing recruitment requests for full-time hours. Things like sponsorship can only be offered for full-time hours. So it's that process piece around when you will offer and when you won't. Determine the visa type to be offered. So whether it's a TSS visa, after 3 years, so they stay on a TSS visa for 3 years, and then you look at the criteria as to the exemptions of when you might sponsor them for PR down the track. Makes the offer to the candidate. They complete a visa nomination approval form. So that is where they send that to the medical workforce unit as a successful applicant to consider. And then they approve the contract in a timely manner. That's some examples of the level of detail that you need to have around what is your hiring manager's responsibility. Similarly, you need to have an onboarding requirement and responsibility around candidates. So very clearly around how you will onboard them once they're here, and that obviously occurs down this arm of the the piece of the puzzle in terms of your mobility program. It's really important also that you are often and regularly effectively reviewing and assessing how well your plan is actually working, and looking at continuous improvement measures around, are there areas for improvement? Where are the gaps? Where are the loopholes? And where are we finding most risk, for example? So you need to be mitigating your risks as well as looking at your pain points. And that's something we'll look at as a general sort of comment today as well. Sorry, yes, I did ask whether anyone had any comments or question on this before I launched into speaking again. I just wanted to ask, did anyone want to comment or have any questions on that?
I'll say something, Yvette. I think one of the key challenges in this process is that it's often a process that occurs across multiple months,
Yeah,
that candidates may well have potential opportunities elsewhere that they're pursuing. And I think, maintaining that candidate contact is really critical because if people fall through the cracks, if those communications aren't happening, then there is a real risk that, candidates will look at offers elsewhere
Yeah, that's
because
right.
there's a great need for some sense of certainty and continuity, I think, in that process.
Absolutely. And this is where the engagement between these units is going to be really critical to ensuring those candidates are engaged, because by the time they come to us, they may already have started to disengage. And this is when sometimes the conversation becomes difficult from our perspective, because they're starting to ask us questions that we can't necessarily answer around how soon will they sponsor us for permanent residence. And of course, we know that a number of you have those policies in place, but often what they're asking is will you make an exception for me? And we can't answer those questions. And so we do often direct them back to come back into your arms and actually discuss that. And I know, and I think Amy will talk about this as well as Kate, they do have some cases where they do fall into those exemptions where they might consider it sooner, but they're fewer than than the norm. More often than not, they need to work out and work out that time period of their probation, at least the year or 2 years before they'll even be considered, having worked and worked out. Because the issue is, and this is the reality, is they're a moving feast, because they know once they get here, they have opportunities maybe elsewhere, and you want to make sure that you're getting bang for your buck, if you like, in terms of the amount you've invested to bring a candidate across, that they actually are giving something back. And they are actually spending that time and giving it a go. I mean, after 1 month or 2 months, if they're not happy, it's perhaps early in the piece, they might just need to get over that hurdle and work it through. So it's really having all those support mechanisms in place. And I think having some discussion earlier today with Amy, there are those mechanisms that certain locations have put in place in terms of settlement services to support candidates as well once they're here. And I know Shepparton has done something like that, but there may be others in other locations. So we'll talk through all these things, and I'm sort of being a little bit vague because I know we're going to get into the detail of this shortly. So I just wanted to give you this snapshot around the detail that's needed. Let's move into some of the pain points. So what are some of the pain points? So I've mentioned that it's really important that you have a clearly defined international recruitment process. So as I've said, the objectives are clear to all your stakeholders from the start of the process to the finish. So from the time, the advertisement goes out to the time that the candidate actually gets that reimbursement from the government, that incentive that they receive. So from the start to the finish, it's very clear. Everyone understands what their requirement of their role are. Ensure your stakeholders understand the steps involved and the process for visa sponsorship. So having that workflow is a visual is really going to help them to understand where they sit and where you're up to in the process. So everyone's clear, we're here. We haven't moved beyond assessment at this point. We're going into the pool, and it's going to be looked at through the medical workforce unit whether they're a suitable candidate to progress to an offer, for example. And so it's really clear everyone knows which step you're up to with a candidate. And then very clearly, as I've said, role and responsibilities of all involved are set out in a document. It's not just, clear in their mind. You actually have a procedural document, which I know Goulburn Valley Health has provided me with. It's a very detailed, extensive document. I can't share it with you, unfortunately, but certainly we'll talk through some of it today. But it's, this document in itself, to give you an idea, is 15 pages, and it goes through every bit of detail in that workflow. You need to have policies around visas and sponsorship. So that is, you have to have established policies so that you can manage your candidates' expectations and they understand what you'll cover and what you won't. So the key question that often comes up is, when will I be able to get, PR sponsorship? So we'll talk a bit about that. Make sure you've got those policies established and that you communicate them clearly at that early stage to candidates. We have had instances where, as the immigration lawyers, we get the candidate and we're sort of chatting with them about questions, and it hasn't been discussed, or it's not clear to them as to when permanent residence might be an option for them. So that communication piece early on managing that expectation is going to be critical, I believe, to keeping that candidate engaged and wanting to move through the process with you. Because as you know, they've got offers on the table, more than just your offer, for example. And so they're considering which is the more favorable for them. The ones that are overseas that are not onshore that you're making these offers to, of course, they're considering perhaps an offer from Canada, an offer from, the UK, or wherever they may be. And if it is they get permanent residence sooner, let's say going through the Canadian route, then that may be where they go, because it's more favorable. So it's a question of weighing up the candidate, and obviously then considering that candidate, whether an exemption or an exception can be made, in that case, to, and be very clear around your process as to when you'll make those exceptions. Then, of course, understanding this financial reimbursement and incentive that, particularly in Victoria, the government has put through. So we often get candidates asking us about that reimbursement. And so from our perspective, we don't really like to engage in that discussion because it's a financial sort of conversation that needs to be had that really isn't in our scope. So it's clear, I think, that that is also something that needs to be discussed early, of how those funds will be used and when they will receive their reimbursement, because that seems to be also very front of mind. So policies around that are also important. So that's just an example of some of the pain points that we see on this side as immigration lawyers when we're dealing with some of the candidates. But of course, the experts in this space are going to be those that are on the ground. But before I move into chatting with Amy and Kate, did anyone have any questions they wanted to ask in the chat? Or did anyone have anything they wanted to raise their hand or make a comment at this point relating to concerns around the process that you're experiencing? Comments, what's working for you, what's not, or maybe you have a successful program that you're considering, that you really don't need to make changes. You're quite satisfied, and happy to hear those comments as well. I'm going to take silence as that everyone thinks everything's fine. And they want to get, I think the juicy bits is going to be really with Amy and Kate. I mean, this is all very sort of overview what Jackson and I have spoken about. And of course, I've given you some examples of things that you can consider if you haven't already started to implement, in terms of flowcharts and policies. But without further ado, I'm going to move into chatting with Kate and Amy. And as Jackson has mentioned, they're both very experienced in this space, particularly. They've both been in the industry, from close to 10 years each, and obviously Amy a lot longer than that. And both of them are coming from, within Goulburn Valley Health. Their focus is probably a little bit different in terms of the candidates they're looking at and the teams they might be working with within Goulburn Valley. And so perhaps each of you, maybe Amy and Kate, welcome. I might ask you to come off mute in case you've forgotten to do that. And perhaps each of you give a little bit of a blurb around your focus areas within Goulburn Valley Health.
Thank you, Yvette and Jackson. Welcome, everybody. We're pleased to be involved in today's webinar, trying to assist our peers in trying to implement a robust immigration policy system program at your respective health services. Like Yvette and Jackson alluded to, I've been at Goulburn Valley Health for nearly 18 years now, and my primary focus has been the recruitment and management of all junior medical staff. And one of the key roles in that area is managing their migration and visa nominations and pathways. So we have approximately 85% of our staff are international medical graduates, and the last number of years during COVID and post-COVID has seen a big increase in that area. So we've had to implement a number of policies and changes to how we recruit our medical staff, and how we transition them from either the 482 visa stream or direct entry 186 permanent residency stream. So our key focus has been trying to obviously retain and provide continuity of care in our health service, and one of the selling points of that is offering permanent residency to our medical practitioners. And I'm pleased to say we've been able to keep a number of medical practitioners anywhere between 2 to 5 years, which has been a massive improvement in the past. So that's been a success for us in some specialty key areas that we've been struggling to fill. So that's a little bit about what I manage here at Goulburn Valley Health, and I'll just hand over to Kate.
Thanks, Amy.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate. So I basically look after the visa nominations for everyone who's not a doctor, really. So that's predominantly nurses so far, and occasionally we get someone in the allied health space. Unfortunately, not as often as we'd like, because they are really hard to find. So yeah, it's same as Amy. Our international recruitment has really increased in that space in the last couple of years. Jobs that we used to be able to fill in our local paper, we're now having to look overseas to fill, and it's not looking like getting any better. So yeah, we've recently put in a new position, the manager of the nursing and midwifery workforce, to try and coordinate this between nursing areas as well. So that it can't say a candidate's not suitable for one area, they might be suitable for another, so that they're not lost to the organisation. There's sort of a coordinator between the different nursing areas, so that we can still employ that person somewhere that they are suitable and interested, obviously. But yeah, we have a lot of nurses currently going through the process. We've recently just really increased our recruitment, and we've got a lot going at the moment that we'll hopefully looking to onboard at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
To increase.
Excellent. So it's a busy practice in terms of your work, as I expect a lot of the other medical workforce units are experiencing as well. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I know we've had this discussion together before, is why do you think your international workforce program has been successful?
I guess because we've been highly reliant on IMGs for such a long time. So it's not new for Goulburn Valley Health, who's a major regional referral centre in Victoria, to have relied on internationals to supplement and create our workforce, basically. So it's not new to us to manage the process of hiring an overseas candidate, having their compliance and documentation ready to complete their visa nomination. So I guess from our perspective, it's something that we've been doing for the past 20 odd years. And we've really embedded a process at Goulburn Valley Health with respect to both medical and the non-medical side of the visa nomination and application process for all our prospective employees. So we've always had that open communication with our prospective employees, what our intentions are, how they will be guided, what support networks are in place for them to ensure they have a smooth transition in coming to Australia and to work at Goulburn Valley Health. So, and I guess the experience of the workforce team and having continuity in that team for the number of years has really, assisted Goulburn Valley Health in maintaining that knowledge, understanding and processes on how to onboard an overseas trained professional.
Yep. And so, of course, what we've got on the screen in the background is very much what you've established in terms of process. And this is something that you mentioned, it was there, but not as much detail pre-pandemic. And so during COVID, this document needed to be created in quite a lot of detail so that everyone was on the same page around international recruits. And of course, because you would have seen an influx in trying to get international, recruitment happening for Goulburn Valley, as every hospital. So this document, being 15 pages, as I mentioned, really sets out the detail of, as I've mentioned, you've clearly defined the role and responsibilities, as I sort of indicated, is a critical element to being able to have that workflow operate efficiently and effectively. So everyone knows what their responsibilities are. And so you've set out very clearly who your people development and engagement person is and what their role and responsibilities are. They're required to provide support and assistance to the hiring department heads and managers to check work rights, ensure all appointments of international candidates have valid working rights, ensure vacancies are being advertised in the international market, manage sponsorship administration, provide education and support to hiring managers, look at labour market testing requirements, etc., manage designated area endorsement if sponsorship is under the Dharma. And we know how user-friendly that program is. Maintain a register of non-medical staff on working visas, and notify, DHA immediately of any changes of conditions of employment on the 482, et cetera, et cetera. So this is very clearly defined. It then goes into the medical workforce unit, the department heads, and it's like pages and pages of very, very detailed sort of roles and responsibilities. How do you think that has helped in terms of, the workflow of your international recruitment? Do you see that as a critical element to the success of the program?
Absolutely. It sets out exactly what it's the basic information. If anyone's considering international recruitment, if they've advertised and can't fill a role, they can refer to this and learn the basic information. Then, if they have further questions, they know who to ask as well. It tells them what their responsibility is, and also what everyone else's is as well. So if you've got a particular question about something, you know which team to refer it to. You're not just sitting there going, well, I'm not sure who to ask that, who might know. But yeah, it's really clear on.
Yeah, so Kate, my question would be also with talent acquisition teams, there is, you've mentioned one of the successes is that you've had that continuity in your teams. And so that's excellent. So as part of the onboarding process of any new recruits you have, so in the talent acquisition team, this would be a compulsory part of their training and onboarding to be, trained up on process and understanding the requirements under the sort of the international recruitment policy.
Yeah.
Is that so that's a standard approach in terms of training up?
Yeah, but also all managers, anyone considering overseas sponsorship, they're all referred to this procedure because obviously it's on our internal, our intranet with all the other policies and procedures. So.
Excellent. Okay. So moving on, I think one of the things people might be very interested in to hear about is what have been your pain points. So, I mean, obviously you've got this, great process and system, but I imagine as time has moved on, there have been certain things that have come up for you. And then, of course, you need to tweak your process. But what sort of pain points have come up for either of you in either of your teams? And how have you resolved that? Do you have an example of something?
We get what you generally would know more upfront, right? We need to go international for this, whereas we get ones where they have an international applicant and then they'll say, oh, what do we do? And it's like, well, now you need to start your labour market testing and sort of keep this candidate warm while we go through that process, because you weren't anticipating having to look internationally for this role, so it wasn't done to start with. Other ones where we are looking international to start with, managers just get a bit discontented with the length of the process.
So that's a big one. That would be a big one, I imagine.
Absolutely.
The hiring managers are screaming and saying, we needed them yesterday. Why is it taking so long?
Yeah.
How do you handle that? And so what is the best approach here to manage all those expectations of candidates, hiring managers, internally, externally? What is your recommendation there?
Well, I actually have started tracking it because as the international recruits numbers have gone up, I had to start a spreadsheet to keep track of where they were all at. So as part of that, it gives me some data that I can say, look, you're looking to recruit internationally. Currently, if we sponsor someone, it's a 6.9 month turnaround from when Employment Services gets the paperwork to when that person starts. So that they're aware.
I mean, the reality is that that's crazy, right? I mean, we've got shortages in this country, and I think part of the the thing that is being reviewed and needs to be sort of communicated back into feedback to the department is this process and the timing, so that you get, boots on the ground sooner than later. That, to quote 6 to 9 months is not really helping anybody, really. But for the moment, that's what we're stuck with.
It
And
is.
so, yeah, so it sounds like, you've got some process in place, and it sounds like the tracking is one suggestion.
Yeah, just so that it sort of manages their expectations. It's not great. We're looking to recruit internationally. They'll be here in 3 months. That's just not realistic. Another thing is to also look at over recruitment so that we know there are possible timeframes when people are going to come. Also, in that almost 7 months, you're probably likely to have others resign, go on parental leave, that sort of thing. Is it worth over recruiting now so that you are sort of not so behind in your recruitment times, and looking again in another 6 months and then starting again? So
Has that worked? I mean, is that over recruitment a good strategy, do you think, in this
we're
current
only a
climate?
couple of months into that one, so ask me again
Okay.
in 6 months.
I
We're
guess
trialing it out. It's a
that's
pilot
for
program
the
at the moment.
nursing
Yeah, that's for the
and
nursing.
allied health sort of.
Yeah,
Or
look, that's
mostly
more
nursing.
sort of unit specific. If they have a couple
Yeah.
of, like, if they have the candidates in there, we'll go and say, can we have approval to over recruit? You've got these candidates now. They're not
Yeah.
going to be here for this long. If we start now, you know,
Whereas with respect to medical, I can comfortably have someone onshore interviewed APRA within 2 months. I think the
Yep.
record was 9 weeks we had
Wow.
from interview APRA and your successful 482 visa onshore. So I guess the main emphasis here from a medical perspective is they do give priority to decision ready applications. If your APRA is decision ready, there is no delay in their approval. If everything is substantiated and the documentation is sent to APRA at the front on the portal and everything is correct, it will be approved within 4 weeks. There's no doubt about that. And we've had successful IMGs throughout the year who've had their application approved within 4 to 6 weeks. It's not
So the
it's not a
doctors.
problem GV Health has experienced, and then you can go and lodge their 482 nomination. So from a timeline perspective, and we've met it as a state at a number of forums in the medical workforce space, we can't say we've had issues with timelines in a medical workforce space because everything has, when it runs the plan, it's been streamlined, and I can't emphasize enough about the decision ready application.
Yeah, so that's critical. And this is where I think on the nursing side and allied health, it gets tricky because the APRA registration and those other registrations they require take time, because a lot of them are coming from
applicants already have their APRA before they even
it's the
apply
ANMAC
for roles. And for a 482, they don't need the skills assessment. Our delays are more so related to the demographic of people we're hiring. Most of them are nurses. They're in their mid to late 30s. They've got a partner. They've got kids. If they're coming from the UK, they've got to give 2 months' notice. They're moving their family to the other side of the world. Their application process seems to have a few pain points, as mainly getting international police checks, because they're often not born in the UK, so they need a police check for every country they've worked in.
Or lived
They
in for
need
12 months
a
or
medical
more.
check, and the medical the GP system in the UK, that takes a long time to get an appointment. So it can
There are
take
some
a few months for
blockages.
their application to get approved, just because it's taking them a few months to get all the paperwork together from all the different organisations they need.
So is there a better way then? I mean, I think we've said decision ready is key. The issue is the document gathering, and then also making sure the advertising is done, of course. And so you would have the advertising sorted because you've got a dedicated person looking after that, which is your people and what was they called? The people development manager.
Yeah, the
is
advertising
responsible.
done within the employment service team.
Yes. And so I guess then, in terms of from the immigration side, we come into the piece at the point where the job offer has been made. And usually it's a signed contract, or sometimes we're asked to do a bit of an assessment to say, would this person be eligible for a 482, where you're getting very close to an offer. Then we're often introduced to the candidate, and some teams or some healthcare providers will ask us to chat with the candidate around their questions around immigration. So they might have very specific questions they want answered. One of them, and of course the key one that comes up, is when can I apply for PR? Now, we can obviously give them an assessment around when they would be eligible to apply. But the question then becomes, when will you sponsor? When will I be able to be sponsored for PR? Like, when will they be prepared to do that? That's a policy issue, and that's something that we all often direct back, or if we know what the policy is, we can advise them of that, and then again direct them back to have those conversations with you. I mean, sometimes we find the PR is a deal breaker, I guess is what I'm saying. How do you, we spoke this morning about some of the exemptions you have in place. So perhaps, with the nursing, you have certain levels that you look at and sort of qualification sort of set out how you sort of assess your nurses. Are you prepared to sort of share a bit of that and really look
Yeah.
at, where do the exemptions sit? What sort of exemptions do you consider for someone to go straight to PR?
So we sort of have three options. We have the 482 for 3 years, or could
Yeah.
be longer. We have a 482 for 2 years with guaranteed sponsorship for permanent residency after 12 months successful employment. Or we sometimes go straight to permanent residency. Our talent acquisition team will do a risk assessment based on the applicant's skills and knowledge and the department's vacancy rate, what sort of skills they need, and also, how hard to fill the roles are. So, for example, we've recently done a redevelopment and expanded our number of theatres. So we needed a huge number of theatre nurses, which was a hard to fill role normally. And so if we get an application from, say, an experienced, highly skilled theatre nurse, we would consider permanent residency straight away. We did have a limited budget for that, and that also included the PR pathway ones, the 482 to 12 months PR. And it's still all just based on risk assessment, and also how likely are we to lose that candidate that we really want if we don't offer PR.
Yeah. And with the doctors, you wouldn't experience necessarily a similar thing. Often you're going to PR fairly soon, and they'll qualify usually without a question, dependent on age, of course, although we can seek exemption in certain cases, depending on what type of doctor they are as well. So we have some restriction, for example, with anaesthetists who, the TRT pathway at the moment is really the only way for PR. They can't go through direct entry.
Yes. So we've recruited a number of specialists over the past 6 to 12 months in certain disciplines that were hard to fill, and that we've actually had it in their contract that they will transition to PR after 6 to 12 months. Satisfactory service to Golden Valley Health, and that has been a deal breaker for some consultants who are moving, like Kate said, their whole family to Australia. And it's not so much, I think sometimes they really want permanent residency because they have kids going to university and all those other contributing factors that, they're uprooting their family, they're moving to another country, they want a good education for them. So it sometimes also comes down to their spouse and dependents on how they can provide for them. And if they have university age children or secondary school children moving to university, permanent residency is a must really for those types of specialists. And we've been able to accommodate them, and they've been a huge get for our community. They've purchased homes in Greater Shepparton area. They've made a massive contribution to the hospital and our wider community. And I think it's been a very successful, last 12 to 18 months in getting those consultants and specialists based in Shepparton, and having, you know, the care provided to our community and preventing them to travel to Melbourne to seek further treatment. So it's been great for us, and it just, and I think our program's working really.
We've had a question, if you don't mind me digressing, and it's a question from one of the attendees today, from Marty. It says, would like to know if and how Goulburn Valley assists the document gathering process for registration to reach the decision ready stage more quickly. So I imagine you're referring to nurses and allied health, or generically perhaps.
Probably
because that's really... Yeah. So how do you actually do that? I mean, I can see, you know, in a number of these flows that I've looked at, in terms of how other healthcare providers manage, they have a team that basically does that. In terms of, some of them do actually assist with the registration process. I have seen some charge a fee to do that and assist the candidate. Some outsource it. So I used to work somewhere where we actually were involved in working with the healthcare providers in doing the registration process for the OTs and for the speechies, and they paid us a fee to work with the candidate to sort out the registration. I'm not sure how you manage that at Goulburn Valley, whether that's something you assist them with, or you basically, it's on the candidate to do it.
Yeah. So, Marty, I can answer this question if it's about medical registration. So I guess we send an extensive email to all our potential international medical graduates coming to Goulburn Valley Health or with potential employment, advising them of the process of APRA and encouraging them all to use the online portal to have their documentation uploaded. We also, I've been sending the last number of years the certification policy, because we found a few years ago they weren't having their documents certified correctly, and that was also holding up the in principle approval process. So I've been trying to provide as much information I can at the pre-employment stage of the information required by APRA, you know, little things like telling them, get your certificates of good standing from every medical council that you've previously worked, have them sent directly to APRA. So I even add a one-liner in my email with respect to that, because sometimes they have them sent to them and then they post it to APRA, which APRA won't accept that. It has to come directly from the medical council. So just little things like that can significantly, you know, improve the timeframes around having them assessed and quickly, you know, approved if they're all, you know,
so this is where I think part of the process of having a really solid program is very much about the systems you have in place as well. So you mentioned people being able to upload their documents, is making sure that that's available to them. You know, in terms of, you know, the document gathering, let's say if you're assisting them with APRA, I think often these individuals are working full-time wherever they're located as well, and having to then run around and sort out the APRA it's an added burden. I mean, of course, it's their choice if they decide they're going to migrate and they have to take that responsibility. But if they can outsource it to someone and assist them to do it, it may speed it up if you're really keen to get a candidate. So from our perspective, I mean, I think potentially we might be able to assist there. I guess that's an opportunity for us to help. But in terms of, I guess, as a general comment, is trying to take some of that weight off the candidate may speed up the process if that's what's really holding things up. As a suggestion, I mean, I know ultimately there's only so much you can do, you know, but perhaps in terms of, you know, if that's the biggest delay, is looking at how that can be improved to facilitate that sort of candidate experience as a positive one. And actually have maybe someone dedicated assisting with APRA registrations. That's just, I'm just talking generally. I'm not sure whether that's feasible. It may not be. So the comment is here that they've been developing processes, but and obviously looking at their global mobility program, but they need to do more to support the registration, as this seems to be causing the main delays. And I think that, Marty, that actually is a common theme. Everyone has the same issue, but it is worth looking into how, you know, how you can speed that up if you can offer that service to a candidate.
Yvette, if I might be able to ask a question to Amy and Kate.
Sure.
You both mentioned that it's been mentioned that over the last couple of years, you've been able to increase the duration of service for your sponsored workers. And I know this is a pain point for all medical providers, particularly in regional areas, given the temptation to go to the major cities, which are, so much bigger than, a lot of the regional centres. What do you think has the organisation done to actually that has moved the dial on that? Can you point to specific things that you think has led to increased stickiness or engagement from people to stay?
Well, our local council came up with this fantastic initiative, which was the Community Connector program, which is independent to us. That's not just for health; it's all for any employer in the area. We have a lot of orchards and that around here that hire internationally as well. So they support new migrants to the area to find accommodation, to find employment for their partner, to find school, childcare, kinder, whatever's relevant for their children, and also to set them up, introduce them to groups for their interests, like hobby groups, that sort of thing. They also have dinners, like monthly, I think it is, so they meet others that are new to the area. And yeah, it's a really great service that just helps them become part of the community so that they feel welcome and welcome in the area and put down those roots and stay.
Yeah, it sounds logical, doesn't it? But perhaps it doesn't happen enough where, other sort of areas outside of perhaps your community, which seems to have it really well established, perhaps that support is not there. And
Mm.
this is where they're coming unstuck, because they're not embedded in the community. And of course, any successful expat is where the whole family is settled, not just the main applicant. It needs to be a whole of family approach where they're all settled and they're all, feeling like it's working. And so I think your local council has obviously, done some work and hit it in the nail on the head there, and it's obviously working. Um,
And I think leading on to Jackson's question as well, the redevelopment of the health service over the past 4 years has also increased our clinical service delivery and our models of care that now we do provide to the community. And as a result of the increased service delivery, we've needed additional specialists and consultants to run that service. So, they've seen it as an opportunity to relocate to a regional area what's only 180 kilometres north of Melbourne to, deliver a service, to run a new program for the community. So that has really been attractive to some of the consultants who have come to set up their own private practice as well as provide services to the local community hospital. So that's also been a contributing factor over the last 24 months is why we've been able to attract a number of key specialists to our area as well.
So career
So,
opportunities in,
yeah.
in, in some respects. And I
Something
guess,
else we do offer too is accommodation support when people first get here, either put them into our hospital accommodation if it's available and suitable, or provide an allowance to cover that first couple of months, just to help support their rental payments, sort of thing. So
yeah,
yeah,
I've seen communications in the past where, for example, an IMG comes over with family and they get, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. And that's an incredibly short time in some respects to need to get everything together in a new workplace, in a radically different workplace culture. Your spouse is trying to get settled, your kids are trying to get settled. It's difficult, yeah, particularly if the someone's trying to work full time and deal with some of those issues. So yeah, I think that sort of support is really, really beneficial, obviously.
yeah.
Did I see a hand go up in the audience? Was there a question from the audience there, or was it just someone's accidentally pressed a button? I'll take as an accidental button press.
Okay. So I can see we've probably got about 20 minutes left. I wanted to ask also what advice you might have for hospitals trying to finalise a solid strategy. So where do you think the starting point is? Where do you think they should actually, obviously there's a number of pain points we've spoken about, but if they're going to start somewhere, what would your advice be?
I guess I don't know what their obstacles are at the moment, but I guess getting all the executives in one room and having an open discussion just to say, this is where we're headed, this is the new norm for, Victoria. Some health services have never had to dive into the IMG space before, and they probably haven't had the experience or the exposure in international recruitment. But I guess it's just about keeping everybody informed and then having process and policies to really embed how you're going to move forward, and you need to have those key decisions made. You cannot implement a policy or a procedure without not knowing whether, yes, you are going to sponsor them, no, you're not. What is the process? So work all that out first, come to a consensus with everyone in the room together. This particular document that we've got had to have board ratification because it had a substantial cost impact to the organisation. So I guess it is a lengthy document. It does have a substantial amount of information, but it's about understanding what your needs are as a health service and how you are going to move forward with international recruitment, either in the medical, nursing, allied health space, and have it, approved, and knowing that what you are potentially willing to provide your candidates, and trying to have that open disclosure and open conversation at the start of the recruitment process, saying, well, yes, this is our health service, this is what we can offer you. And I'm sure by having that transparency at the start will really hopefully increase people's ability to recruit and retain their staff. But I think most of the time people get disgruntled, and prospective applicants get disgruntled when they're not informed at the start on what they're currently being offered, because they want what's best for them, and they're going to shop around, and you might be able to provide the end of what they want in permanent residency, and if you provide that in 12 months time, not in 6 months time, they're probably still happy to come, as long as they have that reassurance that they will meet their end goal, but it might take a bit longer.
Yeah. And I think you hit you mentioned an important word, and that was transparency. And I think having these transparent policies in place, everyone's across them, everyone understands them in your group, within, your healthcare sector. And then you can communicate that effectively to the relevant candidates and make sure it's done at that early stage to manage the process. Because if you've communicated it early, the rest flows, in my view. Obviously, there'll be different things that come up, and there are some unique set of circumstances that apply to some individuals. But as a general rule, if you've managed expectations up front, everyone's on the same page and they're getting the same message. The messaging is the same across whoever they speak to, and they're not getting different advice from different people. It tends to then flow, and you're more likely to keep them stuck with you throughout the process, because it's where they get confused and there's no clarity. I think is where they potentially start looking elsewhere, or maybe consider other offers. So wanting to sort of wrap up this section, I wanted to make sure everyone feels like they've been heard if they wanted to answer or ask any questions before we move on to the next segment. Does anyone have any burning questions or comments to ask Amy or Kate? So there is one more that's come from Marty. Do you have any tips or recommendations for successful professional transition and induction for international recruits?
Is that in regards to medical, Marty, or nursing?
So I guess what you're saying is it's very different if you're a doctor, if you're recruiting, and whether it's the nurses, you've got a completely different onboarding induction program. So she's probably said both, but just in general, what would you recommend for a successful transition?
We have sort of talked about more so in the nursing space, because that's, for my area, that's where most of the internationals are coming, is how do we actually introduce them to Australian healthcare, GV health procedures, that sort of thing. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure on the detail. I don't know how it differs from any other new recruit, so I'm not really
So
sure.
it would be part of your onboarding process, right? You'd have a team that
there
looks
is,
after
but I don't know
onboarding and
if they then
induction.
do additional supernumerary shifts or have a buddy or that sort of thing. I'm not sure what they actually if it differs from a normal new recruit. Sorry.
Yeah. From a medical perspective, we have a very robust orientation program for our internationals. So it is a 2-week program before hitting the floor, so to speak. So with respect to any like registrar or pre-vocational trainee doctor, they'll do a week of orientation, meeting different people around the organisation, completing their online mandatory program, and that sort of stuff. So just like a meeting with pharmacy, just how do they do, write up an MR6 drug chart or just things like that. We try and really provide them enough information and orientation as possible. So they'll do a 1-week extensive non-clinical orientation. Then they do a week of clinical orientation on the ward as supernumerary. So basically, they're shadowing a staff member who will be doing the same job as them the following week. So, and then they do a 2nd week of orientation. They meet with our medical clinical educators and that sort of stuff during that 2-week period. So, but I can share that information with you, Marty, not a problem.
I suppose it's easier for you guys because you have them more sort of, they start in a block, don't they? Whereas we have sort of one start here and then one starts a couple of weeks later, and it sort of might only be one a month kind of thing. So for nursing, it's
and then
you'd
have to run separate induction programs, I imagine, for each of them, as opposed to bringing them and grouping them together, because it's more difficult. There's less certainty of when their visas are going to be finalised and they'll be able to hit the ground. With some of the nurses, I imagine. So we might pass on your details to Marty, if that's okay, and maybe you can sort of discuss and put her in contact with the right people to sort of chat that through with your contacts. I think that's all we wanted to cover, unless there was another question that anyone had.
I think Emma had her hand up.
Okay. Emma, did you have a question? Oh, she said it was an accident. Okay. All right. That's fine. Thanks, Emma. So we might move on, Jackson. I might let you move into compliance, because obviously that falls nicely. Obviously, having a great, solid, structured mobility program is important, but ensuring it's compliant in terms of your, immigration compliance and the sponsorship is obviously critical as well. So, Jackson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yvette. So, immigration compliance has really come to the fore now with the Albanese government coming into power about 12 months ago. I think everyone's probably aware of their industrial relations focus on addressing issues around worker exploitation, underpayments, and a variety of other things. As part of this, they are also looking at immigration compliance. Immigration has been a big issue in terms of, there's a lot of penalties there, there's a lot of issues there, there's a lot of challenges, but the previous government really wasn't enforcing this very much at all. And the Albanese government has put forward the Strengthening Employer Compliance Bill, which is a new immigration compliance regime. So we already have 3 immigration compliance regimes to do with making sure employees have the right visa, making sure that there's no exchange of a benefit for sponsorship, and the sort of sponsorship obligations that you have as an employer. The government is introducing a new regime. This will basically mean that anyone who is sanctioned for immigration non-compliance as an employer will lose the ability to sponsor temporary visa holders for a period of time, 12 months, 24 months. This is designed to prevent organizations like, there are some pretty notorious sort of hospitality organizations out there who have abused temporary visa holders, gotten in trouble, but then continued to employ temporary visa holders. And this new regime is going to prevent that from happening going forward. And the impact for other organisations is if you potentially do get in trouble for non-compliance, you lose access. So for a healthcare organisation to lose access to doctors and nurses and all of the other critical people is, potentially very serious at an operational level and a strategic level. So this is a really big deal. The government's also added a further $50 million over 4 years for additional compliance activity. And they've just announced that the existing cross government immigration compliance investigations unit will be continued using some of this funding. Okay, so there'll be increased immigration compliance activity. And then lastly, as part of this new bill, they're increasing immigration penalties by up to 400%. Okay, so penalties are going from about $17,000 per offence to $75,000 per offence. And quite often in this space, organisations aren't up for one breach. If you've been employing someone incorrectly for the last 6 months, that's not one breach of the law, that's multiple breaches. So penalties are likely to increase substantially going forward as well. At the moment, they tend to range between 100 and 400,000, but with a 400% increase, you can see that that's likely to go up quite a bit. And it's worth noting that some of those offences are strict liability, which means that the government doesn't have to demonstrate that the business intended to do anything wrong, only that you did do something wrong and you didn't take active steps to prevent it from occurring. So there's quite a bit happening in this space. I think it will be quite transformative over the next couple of years as the government looks to ensure that temporary visa holders aren't sort of dragging down the conditions that Australians experience. We've recently presented a paper on software and immigration compliance to government about how software can assist organisations to address these issues. I know that to date, many organisations are trying to address this through spreadsheets, but really at the scale that public healthcare providers are talking about, 2, 3, 4, 500 visa holders, actually managing all of these obligations is pretty much impossible out of a spreadsheet. Some organisations are starting to update their HR systems. One of the challenges there is that when the government makes a change to the system, you're going to have to get in your external consultants to update your systems to reflect that. And so we have been developing over the course of about 3 years now an immigration compliance platform called Complies, and we've recently engaged a chief technology officer who's assisting with us with that. We're running a pilot program. We've currently got 4 organisations locked in as part of that pilot program. We are focusing on healthcare, hospitality and retail. So there's a big need in areas like, the big fast food franchises have, 20, 30% of their employees are temporary visa holders. And IT, the IT sector has a very high percentage. So people who join the pilot program will be given a significant discount on the standard price for the first 12 months and have an opportunity to sort of work with our chief technology officer on reviewing how the product works, what's good, what's bad, what needs improving, what additional features there are. If you're not familiar with the product, it has 3 main modules. There's a workforce module. Now, this is the main IT component. It's like a HR system, and we've already developed integration with SAP SuccessFactors. And I know that many Victorian hospitals and healthcare organisations are moving towards using SAP SuccessFactors. We don't want our clients to have a separate system that they need to log in to maintain these things. The purpose of it will be that, if you change the status of an employee in your SAP SuccessFactors system, that change will be updated in the compliance system. And if it's likely to cause an immigration issue, it will flag that. Okay, so there's all sorts of logic built into the system to ensure that employers are only complying with the visa conditions that the person has on their current visa. We've also got a knowledge module, which is designed for organizations where immigration is managed in-house. There's insufficient information in the Home Affairs website. It's not always accurate. This is like a Wikipedia of immigration knowledge that's been written and maintained by immigration lawyers. And then we've got a training module, which is for both stakeholders and for employees. So where I mentioned before that you've got an obligation as an organization to go out and make sure employees understand certain things, we've created micro compliance modules, a bit like OH&S modules or anti-money laundering, and people would do these modules once a year or once every 6 months. They last about 15 minutes, and it basically tells people what they're allowed to and not allowed to do, so that if the organization ever gets in trouble based on an employee's activities, you can point to that and say, well, the organization provided that training and people were told what they can and they can't do. So that's a defense against liability. The system currently has all of that sort of compliance component in there, and the logic around the visa types and that sort of stuff. It also stores documents and maintains your visa status. Everyone here would be aware that you need to run the Vivo checks at least quarterly, we suggest. The system has automated Vivo checking. It's just part of the service. You can set that to run on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, quarterly, whatever you want, and it will flag with you, upcoming visa expiries. It will flag if someone's visa status changes. We've got the knowledge base and the learning center. Upcoming features for the next quarter will be finalizing that success factors integration, introducing an audit feature so that employers can go through their records and make sure that everything is up to date, and then generating documents. So as part of our knowledge base, we will have all of the templates that our law firm uses, such as reference letters or statements for Home Affairs. All of these type of documents that you need to prepare as part of the nomination or visa process will be there, and you'll be able to generate them out of the system automatically. And then in 2024, we will be working on a pre-employment module. Kate, you mentioned that one of the challenges, I think, is that understanding the process and understanding the timeframes and the transparency. This module is designed specifically for that. So it's designed to start before the immigration piece. When you have that first engagement with a candidate, you record their details, add their CV, and you can do things like checks with working for children and all these sort of things. So those are the upcoming features. I've also got a very brief video that I'd like to show you just very quickly, which shows the current state of the system. Can everyone see the video on the screen there? So I'll just start it from the start. So this is the login screen, obviously. Once you log in, you can see current status across the organization. So this is organization wide. You can see who has what visas in the organization. You can see have people had all of their Vivo checks completed? Do you have the relevant records for your Australian citizens? Are the Vivo checks being run on a regular basis? Has everyone in the organization completed their training? So, for example, when you onboard a new temporary visa holder, you can allocate the training to them. That can either be done through this system or it can be done through an internal LMS. We can provide you the SCORM files to do that in your LMS. Are all the stakeholder obligations up to date? Because it's not just about your visa holders, it's also about the organisation, managing obligations like making sure the government knows if there's a change of directors and this sort of thing. Beyond that, on the left-hand side, you can see you go into a notification for the organisation or for an individual. Do we need to notify the department that there's been a change of directors, that there's been a change of the organisation status? You can upload information, send that through. At this stage, that will come through to us to manually verify and check if there's any issues. In future, there may be some degree of automation, but only once we're very confident that it's going to be 100%. This is the employee screen. You can see the person's name, job title, employment type, what sort of visa they have, okay? what work rights they have. You can see the visa type, the visa expiry. Do we have the relevant documents? Have we run a Vivo check recently to make sure that they have the right visa? Is the visa expired or going to expire? We also keep records of the family members, because for a sponsored visa holder, like a 482 visa holder, we have to track the status of different family members. Okay, so children, spouse, and so forth. We can make notifications for them about, someone's going back home, a visa's ceasing, someone's job's changed. This is the knowledge base, which is the Wikipedia style information that I was referring to, where you'll have all of the different guidance. If you have a question about labour market testing, you have a question about market salary rates, you can go in here and check it. We also have those resources that I was mentioning, where you're able to generate documents for employees depending on the different circumstances. They'll automatically fill in the person's name, details, job titles, all of those sort of things. You can see there the different documents that you can generate. And then we have, this is the different courses that I was mentioning. 10 at the moment, we've got 10 micro certifications for visa holders, for line managers, for stakeholders like medical workforce and HR, as well as executives. It's very likely that a lot of executives in the organization don't understand that they face potential jail time for non-compliance. So you can allocate training to different people in the organization based on their roles, so that they understand their responsibilities, their liabilities, and what they have to do. This is an example of those course certifications. They're currently being redesigned by a professional LMS designer to, meet all the standards for a SCORM course and that sort of thing. So hopefully they will be rejigged slightly and made a bit more attractive. We will also have regular webinars through this, and this is our main immigration training. It's basically at an undergraduate law standard, and it's designed to allow people to go through and understand all about Australian immigration, so that they can basically work as a HR professional in your organization, as a medical workforce professional. It's designed to bring you to the standard of a first year law subject. Okay, it's not legal in its nature. It is really just based around immigration for HR and medical workforce without the legal technicalities. So that's what the course looks like. If you're interested in the pilot program, we'd be very interested in speaking to you. We've got space for 10 organisations in the pilot program, and we're very hopeful that it will make a really substantial difference to organisations. It was designed initially for a medical environment. It was designed partly in conjunction with Murdoch Children's Research Institute. They have a very complex immigration environment, because they have people from Melbourne Uni, they have people from the Royal Children's, they have visiting researchers, they have their own employees. It's a very complex environment, and working with them, the potential to sort of automate a whole bunch of these things were identified. We've spent 3 years developing this in the background during the COVID period. But now, with the changing environment and the increased focus, we think it's a really important time for organisations to start looking at immigration compliance, because I think that no healthcare organisation wants to be sanctioned, of course, and all of the work you do in being positive players in the local community, no one wants that undone by mistakes occurring in the immigration sector. And unfortunately, immigration compliance is so fiddly that that's always a possibility. But thank you very much for your time on that, and in general, in having joined us for the presentation. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to shoot through an email. We're always happy to answer. And, I want to wish you all the best in organising your immigration programs and attracting and retaining those key people that are so critical for our community. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
A big shout out to Amy and Kate for sharing their experience and their time. Thank you very much. I think it's been absolutely invaluable. So
Thank you
really
both.
appreciate that.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, how do we just leave?